She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, too smoothly, without the small hesitations that real speech carries. For words, delivered across the kitchen island at 9:17 on a Wednesday night, while the kids were asleep upstairs and the dishwasher ran its quiet cycle in the background. The kids stay with me. My name is Joel Hargrove. I'm 43 years old. I'm a civil litigation attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have spent 17 years learning to recognize the difference between what people say and what they mean, between the argument someone presents and the argument they're actually making. I am very good at this professionally. I was, for a significant portion of my marriage, considerably less good at it personally. When Dana said those 4 words, I had already known for 6 weeks what she was planning. I had known about the consultation with the family law attorney on Tryon Street. I had known about the financial spreadsheet she'd been building on her personal laptop, assets, liabilities, income projections, custody scenarios, the kind of document that takes months to compile carefully and that nobody compiles unless they intend to use it. I had known about the conversations with her sister Renata, who had been through her own divorce 4 years earlier and had become, in the intervening months, Dana's primary strategic advisor. I had known all of this and said nothing. I had gone to work, come home, helped with homework, made weekend pancakes for Caleb and Sophie, attended a school concert, replaced the kitchen faucet that had been dripping since October. I had been, to all external observation, a husband in an imperfect but functional marriage, doing the ordinary work of an ordinary life. Meanwhile, I had been doing something else entirely. The evening she said it, Dana was standing at the kitchen island with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, wearing the particular expression of someone who has arrived at a decision point after a long approach and is committed to not retreating. She had dressed slightly better than the occasion of a Wednesday evening at home required. Her hair was down. These were details I cataloged the way I catalog details in a deposition, not because they were important individually but because patterns matter and patterns require data. The kids stay with me, she said. I think that's the arrangement that makes the most sense. You can have them every other weekend and… Dana, I said. She stopped. Sit down, I said. Something in my voice made her sit. I went to the home office. I came back with a folder. I set it on the island between us, next to the wine she hadn't touched, and I sat down across from her and watched her face as she understood what she was looking at. I think, I said very quietly, that we should talk about what you've actually been planning. Charlotte in September has a particular quality. Still warm enough to feel like summer, but with something different in the light, a slight sharpening of the air that signals the season preparing to change. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Myers Park, the kind of neighborhood where the trees are old and the property values are opinions and everyone has a lawn service. Dana had picked the house. She had also picked the kitchen renovation, the back deck, the specific shade of gray-blue on the living room walls that the designer had called coastal fog and that I had called very blue until I understood that the name mattered to Dana in a way that the color alone did not. She was good at environments the way I was good at arguments, instinctively, thoroughly, with an attention to how things would be perceived from the outside. She ran her event planning business from a home office 3 days a week and client sites the other 2, and she was genuinely skilled at it. The logistics of large gatherings, the management of vendors and timelines, and the particular psychology of clients who wanted perfection and needed to believe they were getting it. We had met at an event she'd planned, a bar association dinner of all things, and I had spent 20 minutes watching her manage 3 simultaneous crises with a composure that I found more attractive than the formal dress she was wearing. That composure was real. It was also, I came to understand, a survival mechanism. Dana did not do well with disorder she hadn't anticipated. Surprises made her tighten. Uncertainty made her plan. The planning was not anxiety exactly, it was more like the constant low hum of a system running contingency calculations, always aware of what could go wrong, always with a partial response queued. I am, by profession and temperament, similar. We were alike in ways that worked and alike in ways that didn't. The ways that worked. We were efficient together, effective parents, good at the mechanics of a shared life. The ways that didn't. 2 people who process everything strategically and share very little of the interior experience of that processing will eventually find themselves in the same house with an enormous amount of unspoken distance between them. The distance had been building for 3 years. Not dramatically. Not with fights or crises or the sudden fractures that make for clean narratives. Just the slow accumulation of evenings where we were both present and both slightly elsewhere, conversations that stayed on the surface by mutual unspoken agreement, a physical closeness that had become comfortable rather than intimate. I had noticed this and filed it. Dana had noticed this and, I now know, begun making calculations. The first sign came in the spring, 18 months before the Wednesday night. I was in the kitchen on a Saturday morning making Caleb's breakfast while Dana was on a call in the office. The door half open, the way it always was when the call was professional rather than personal. I wasn't listening deliberately. I caught 3 sentences because I was walking past. I'm not saying now. I'm saying I need to understand what the process looks like. The asset question is the complicated part. I just want to know what my options are. That's all. I kept walking, made the eggs, poured the juice, told Caleb twice to stop feeding pieces of toast to the dog under the table. I told myself Dana was talking to a client. She did corporate events, fundraisers, weddings. All of them had asset questions, process concerns, option discussions. The language of event planning and the language of preliminary divorce consultation overlap more than most people realize. I chose the event planning interpretation. I am a litigator. I know when I am choosing an interpretation rather than arriving at one. The second sign was the financial accounts. Dana and I had maintained a joint checking account for household expenses and separate accounts for our individual professional incomes, a structure we'd set up early in the marriage and never revisited. It had worked well enough. The joint account got funded monthly from both sides. Bills came out of it, no friction. In June I noticed, reviewing the statements, that Dana's contributions to the joint account had dropped. Not dramatically, 20%, maybe 25%. The kind of reduction that could be explained a dozen ways. Slow quarter for events, delayed client payment, a large personal expense. I made a mental note and watched the following month. The reduction held. I said nothing. I transferred slightly more from my own account to cover the difference and watched the next month. And the month after. By August, the pattern was clear enough that it had a name, even if I wasn't saying the name out loud. She was redirecting money. Building a separate pool. Preparing for a future in which the joint account was no longer her primary financial infrastructure. I still said nothing to Dana. Instead, I called Patrick Ely. Patrick was my closest colleague at the firm, 14 years of shared practice, the kind of professional friendship that develops when two people have spent enough time in high-stakes adversarial situations to understand each other's thinking without explanation. He was also, before joining litigation, a family law attorney. He knew the terrain. I took him to lunch and outlined the situation in the precise, unemotional way I would outline a client's case. He listened without interrupting, which was a professional courtesy as much as a personal one. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're describing someone building a case," he said. "I know what I'm describing. Joel." He set down his fork. "How long have you known?" "Known or suspected?" "Either. Suspected since spring. Known since July. And you haven't said anything?" "Not yet." He looked at me with the expression of someone trying to determine whether he's talking to a rational person or a person in the specific rational seeming state that precedes a very bad decision. "What's your play?" he said. "I don't have one yet." "You need one before she files." "I know. Because if she files first, with 8 months of preparation and a family law consultation already in her pocket." "I know, Patrick." He picked up his fork. "Okay. Then let's talk about what you know and what you can document." We talked for 2 hours. I went back to the office and billed 4 hours to other clients and spent the 5th building the outline of something I hadn't entirely decided to build. I told myself I was being prudent, protecting my children, ensuring I wasn't outmaneuvered in a proceeding that would shape the rest of their lives. All of that was true. It was also the language of strategy, and beneath the strategy was something I didn't have the vocabulary to name at the time. Not anger, not even betrayal exactly, but a specific grief at the discovery that the person I'd built a life with had been running contingency calculations about leaving it for longer than I'd known. October arrived with the particular chill of a Carolina autumn. Not harsh but definitive. The signal that the long, soft season was done. Caleb started a new baseball league. Sophie developed an obsession with drawing horses, producing them on every available surface in the house in a range of artistic styles from representational to aggressively abstract. Dana and I moved through our days with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a household that has found its rhythm, and the rhythm was real even if something beneath it had shifted. I was watching more carefully now. Not obviously, Dana was perceptive and would have noticed obvious surveillance the way she noticed when vendors were overbilling or clients were going to be difficult. I watched the way I watch opposing counsel in a deposition. Attentively, without appearing to, cataloging what was said and what was avoided and what was said too smoothly. The phone calls with Renata had increased. This was the most visible change. Dana and her sister were close, had always been close, but the frequency of their conversations had roughly doubled since September, and the calls that used to happen in the living room now happened in the office with the door closed. Renata's divorce had been contentious. She had come out of it with joint custody, a settlement she considered insufficient, and a detailed operational knowledge of how family court in North Carolina worked. She was becoming Dana's advisor. I could see the shape of it without seeing the content. In November, I made a decision that I have thought about many times since, whether it was justified, whether it crossed a line I shouldn't have crossed, whether the information it gave me was worth the method of obtaining it. I don't have a clean answer. I have the answer I made at the time, which was that my children's living arrangement was at stake and I was not going to enter the relevant proceeding without understanding what I was walking into. I hired a forensic accountant. Her name was Sylvia Marsh, and she was recommended by Patrick as someone who could trace financial flows with the thoroughness of a federal audit and the discretion of a priest. I gave her 6 months of statements, joint account, my accounts, everything I had legal access to, and asked her to show me where the money was moving. She came back in 3 weeks with a report. Dana had opened a personal savings account in February, 10 months earlier, 2 months before the half-open-door phone call I'd overheard. She had been making small, regular transfers into it, never large enough to trigger a conversation, always framed within her normal income variation, building slowly and steadily. By November, the account held $47,000. $47,000. 10 months of careful, systematic preparation. I sat with Sylvia's report for a long time. Not with anger, with something more like the specific stillness that comes when a hypothesis you've been testing is confirmed beyond the threshold of doubt. The kind of stillness that follows the end of uncertainty, before the next phase of the response. I was also, and I want to be honest about this, hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had known something was wrong. I had known for months. But knowing conceptually and reading a forensic accountant's report that showed your wife had been moving money out of the household for 10 months are different experiences. The report made it concrete in a way that thinking about it hadn't. The hurt lasted about an hour. Then I called Patrick and we talked about what came next. The second thing Sylvia found was less expected. In reviewing Dana's business accounts, which I had access to as a co-signer on the business line of credit, a formality from when we'd set the business up years earlier, she found a pattern of expense categorization that didn't track with the revenue Dana was reporting. Not dramatically off. Not the kind of thing that would trigger an audit. But the kind of systematic variance that, over 3 years, amounted to a meaningful number and that had a name under North Carolina law. The name was dissipation of marital assets. I held this information carefully. I did not act on it immediately. I continued to make the pancakes, attend the school concert, replace the kitchen faucet. I continued to be, from the outside, a husband in an imperfect but functional marriage. And I continued to build my folder. The document Dana had been compiling on her personal laptop, the custody scenarios, the asset divisions, the income projections, I didn't have direct access to. But I had something almost as useful. I understood, from Patrick's guidance and my own legal training, exactly what a well-prepared petitioner in a North Carolina custody dispute would need. I knew the arguments. I knew the counter-arguments. I knew what a judge in Mecklenburg County Family Court weighted most heavily in custody determinations. I built my own document, not a spreadsheet, a legal strategy. The kind I would build for any client walking into a proceeding with a well-prepared adversary on the other side. The difference, of course, was that the adversary was my wife. I thought about that sometimes in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed, Dana reading in the next room, the domestic quiet of a house that looked from the outside exactly like a functioning family. I thought about whether what I was doing was right, whether the cold strategic preparation was the correct response to what she was doing, or whether it was the emotional detachment Patrick had gently identified as my primary professional strength and personal liability. I didn't have a clean answer to that either. What I had was Caleb, who at 8 was beginning to understand that adult relationships had interior dimensions children couldn't fully see, who watched Dana and me with the specific attentiveness of a child who loves both parents and is tracking something he can't name. And Sophie, who drew horses and brought them to me at breakfast with the serene confidence of someone who has never questioned whether she will be received. Whatever I was building in that folder, I was building it for them. December and January passed with the surface calm that I had become expert at maintaining. Christmas at Dana's parents' house in Greensboro, cordial, functional. The holiday routines executed with the precision that both families had come to expect. New Year's at home, Caleb allowed to stay up until midnight for the first time. Sophie asleep on the couch by 9 with a paper party hat askew on her head. Dana and I standing on the back deck at midnight with glasses of champagne, watching the neighbors' fireworks, not quite touching. I thought, one of us knows exactly how this year ends. The other one thinks he doesn't. In January, I met with my own family law attorney, a woman named Claire Ashworth who Patrick had described as the best in Charlotte and who, after 45 minutes reviewing my documentation, looked at me with the particular expression of a professional encountering unusually thorough preparation. "You've been building this for a while," she said. 6 months. "And she doesn't know you know." "No. Why haven't you confronted her?" "Because confronting her before I had the full picture would have given her the opportunity to adjust the picture." Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's a litigator's answer." "I am a litigator. You're also a husband." She said it without judgment. "At some point, this has to become a conversation rather than a case." "I know. I'm almost ready for that." "What are you waiting for?" I thought about it. I want to understand what she's actually planning. Not the document on her laptop, I'll never see that. But when she tells me, I want to hear it in her own words, with her own framing, and I want to know exactly what I'm responding to before I respond. Claire nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk about what happens when she does." We spent 2 hours on the legal architecture, custody frameworks, asset division, the dissipation question and how to introduce it, the specific weight that North Carolina courts placed on primary caregiver status, and the careful documentation I had been keeping of my own involvement in Caleb and Sophie's daily lives. Every school pickup, every pediatric appointment, every teacher conference. The folder held 18 months of my parenthood, logged with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that memory is not evidence. In February, 6 weeks before the Wednesday night, the confirmation I'd been waiting for arrived through an unexpected channel. Renata called my cell by accident. She had been trying to reach Dana. They were on a call, apparently, and Dana had stepped away to deal with Sophie, and Renata had hung up and immediately called what she thought was Dana's number. My name and Dana's name are not adjacent in any directory I'm aware of. But Renata had a habit, Dana had told me once, of storing contacts by first name only, and Dana's contact was Dana H and mine was apparently close enough in her phone's prediction algorithm for a tired finger to hit the wrong entry. She started talking before I said anything. 20 seconds of continuous speech about the account question and whether Joel had noticed the contributions dropping, and Sylvia says the Charlotte filing window is better in spring than fall. Then she said, "Dana? You there?" "It's Joel," I said. The silence that followed had a particular quality that I recognized from depositions. The silence of someone understanding that something irretrievable has just happened. "Joel." "Renata," I said pleasantly. "I think you meant to call Dana." Yes. I'm sorry. It's fine," I said. "Tell her I said hi." I hung up, sat in my car in the parking garage beneath the office building. Thought about Sylvia's name coming out of Renata's mouth, the forensic accountant I had hired in the other direction, whose name Renata knew because Dana had hired her own version. They had their own Sylvia. Of course they did. I called Patrick and told him. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "How long do you think you have before Dana knows that you know?" "Renata will call her immediately." "So tonight." "Tonight," I said. "Are you ready?" I thought about the folder on my home office desk, the 18 months of documentation, the conversation with Claire Ashworth, The legal architecture I had been building in the space between the kitchen faucet and the school concerts and the Saturday pancakes. Yes, I said. I drove home, made dinner, helped Caleb with a book report on the American Revolution, the irony of the subject not lost on me. Put Sophie to bed with 3 readings of the horse book she had requested every night for 2 weeks. Came downstairs to find Dana in the kitchen with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking. She had dressed slightly better than a Wednesday evening at home required. She had been expecting to have this conversation. Renata had called her. She had decided not to wait. The kids stay with me. I went to the home office. I came back with the folder. I set the folder on the island between us and sat down. Dana looked at it, then at me. Something in my stillness, the specific quality of a man who is not surprised by anything that is happening, registered on her face as information. "What is that?" she said. "Open it." She didn't move. "Joel, I think we need to." "Open it, Dana." She opened it. The first page was Sylvia Marsh's summary, the account history, the transfer pattern, the $47,000. She looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked up. "You hired someone," she said. "I did. You went through my finances. I reviewed accounts I have legal access to as cosigner on your business line." I kept my voice completely flat. The voice I use in depositions when I want the witness to understand that I already know the answer to the question I'm about to ask. "Turn to page 4. She turned to page 4. The expense categorization analysis. The 3-year pattern. The number at the bottom. She set the folder down. "I can explain." "I know you can. You've been preparing explanations for 8 months. I folded my hands on the island. "Renata said Sylvia's name on the phone tonight. You're Sylvia, so I know you have your own version of what's in that folder. I'm not interested in competing documents right now." I paused. "I'm interested in whether you're going to tell me the truth about what you've been planning." Something shifted in Dana's face. The composure she'd walked into the kitchen with, the rehearsed composure of someone who had prepared for this conversation, cracked at a specific point and reformed into something harder and less managed. "You went through my phone records," she said. "You hired a private accountant to investigate me. You've been surveilling your own wife, Dana, for months, apparently, without saying a word, without giving me any opportunity to." "Dana." I said her name once more, quietly. She stopped. "You consulted a family law attorney in March. You opened a separate savings account in February and have been redirecting household funds into it for 10 months. You've been meeting with your sister, who has operational experience with North Carolina Family Court, as your primary strategic advisor. You compiled a custody and asset document on your personal laptop that I have not seen but whose existence I am confident of." I paused. "I didn't surveil my wife. I responded to evidence that my wife was building a case against me. There is a difference." She was breathing slightly faster. The calculation was running behind her eyes. Not panic, not guilt, but the rapid reassessment of someone who has discovered that the strategic advantage she believed she had does not exist. "You don't get to reframe this as my fault," she said. "The fact that you found out what I was doing doesn't make what you did acceptable." "I'm not asking for a ruling on acceptable," I said. "I'm asking you to talk to me honestly for the first time in 8 months. Maybe longer. You want honesty." The composure fractured further, and what came through was not the anger of someone caught, but the anger of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has found the moment to put it down. "Fine. Honestly, you want to know what 8 months of planning looks like from the inside? It looks like being married to someone for 10 years and never once feeling like they actually let you in. It looks like having every conversation in this house feel like a briefing. Like living with someone who is always composed, always strategic, always 3 steps ahead. And realizing that you have never, in 10 years, seen them scared of losing something." I was quiet. "Do you know what the hardest part of this was?" she said. "Not the planning, not the accounts. The hardest part was realizing I wasn't afraid of you finding out. I was afraid of you not caring." The kitchen was very still. "I'm standing here telling you I've been planning to leave you for 8 months, she said. "And you're sitting there with a folder and a flat voice and I cannot tell. I genuinely cannot tell Whether you're devastated or whether you're just calculating your next move. Something in her voice reached the place where I keep the things I don't put in folders. Both, I said. She stopped. I'm both, I said. I have been both for 6 months. I looked at her directly. You want to know if I was devastated? I found the account transfers in July. I sat in the car in a parking garage for 40 minutes before I could drive. I didn't tell Patrick for 3 days because I couldn't say it out loud. I paused. Then I said it out loud and built the folder. Because that's what I know how to do when I'm hurt. You plan. I document. We are, it turns out, the same kind of person. Dana sat down. Not the controlled sitting of someone taking a position, the sitting of someone whose legs have made a decision. The kids, she said. Her voice was different now. The rehearsed quality was entirely gone. I need them, Joel. That's not strategy. I need them. I know you do. I need them too. I'm their primary caregiver. We are both their primary caregivers, I said. You do more of the daily logistics. I do more of the weekend and evening time. We have, between us, been reasonably good parents to 2 children who are going to need both of us fully present through whatever happens next. I paused. The kids don't stay with you. The kids don't stay with me. The kids live between 2 parents who are going to figure out how to be their parents from different addresses. She looked at me for a long time. Is that really how you see it? That's how a judge in Mecklenburg County will see it if we're reasonable. If we're not reasonable, it becomes something else, and neither of us wants that. You've already talked to a family law attorney. Claire Ashworth. Yes. Something like a short, exhausted laugh escaped her. Of course you have. Dana. I leaned forward slightly. I don't want a war. I never wanted a war. I stopped. Found the honest version. I wanted you to come to me in March when you were first thinking about this. I wanted to have the conversation we should have been having for 3 years before you picked up the phone and called a lawyer. She pressed her hands flat on the island. You wouldn't have had it. You don't know that. Joel. She said my name the way I'd said hers. Once, quietly, meaning stop. I tried. I tried in the oblique way I knew how to try with you, which is apparently insufficient, but I tried. I mentioned the distance. I mentioned feeling like we were business partners. I mentioned twice that I thought we should see someone. And you agreed both times and nothing happened, and I understood that nothing was going to happen because you were comfortable and comfortable was enough for you and it was never going to be enough for me. The silence afterward was long. You're right, I said. She looked up. You tried. In the ways you knew how to try. And I heard you and I didn't move. I paused. I am telling you now that I understand that. I'm not offering it as a reason to try again. I'm offering it as the truth you asked for. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we do now? Tonight? Nothing. Tonight we sit here until we've said what needs to be said. Tomorrow I call Claire and you call your attorney, and we tell them both that we want a negotiated settlement, not a contested proceeding. And the kids, I said. We tell together, on the same day, in the same room, with the same story. No versions. She nodded slowly. The wine glass was still full. The dishwasher had finished its cycle. Outside, through the kitchen window, the Myers Park Street was dark and quiet and utterly indifferent to what was being decided at the island. I need to ask you something, I said. She waited. The dissipation question, the expense categorization in the business accounts. Your attorney has found it by now. So has mine. I paused. I'm not going to use it as a weapon if we can resolve this cleanly. But I need to understand it. Dana was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I started doing it 2 years ago. After the 3rd time I mentioned counseling and nothing happened. I told myself it was insurance. That if I ever needed to leave, I wouldn't be dependent on the joint account. She looked at the table. I know what it looks like legally. It looks like dissipation of marital assets. I know. I'm not going to pursue it if we settle reasonably. I know you're not. She paused. How do you know I know that? Because you know me, I said. Whatever else has gone wrong, you know that I don't use weapons I don't need to use. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face was different. Not the composure she'd carried in, not the anger that had broken through it, but something quieter. Something that looked, for the first time in a long time, like the woman who had managed 3 simultaneous crises at a bar association dinner with a composure I had found more attractive than her dress. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the planning, for not coming to you first." "I'm sorry too," I said, "for being the kind of person you didn't think you could come to." We sat at the kitchen island for 2 more hours. We talked about Caleb, about Sophie, about the specific logistics of 2 lives that had been structurally integrated for 10 years and now required careful, humane separation. We talked about the house, who would stay, what the sale timeline would look like, how to minimize disruption to the children's school and friendships. We talked, for the first time in years, with the kind of honesty that neither of us had known how to access while we were still trying to maintain the architecture of the marriage. It was, I thought, the best conversation we had ever had. And it was the conversation that confirmed we should not be married. She came back 3 months later. Not with strategy. Not with a revised legal position. She came to the house on a Sunday afternoon when I had the kids, knocked on the door I had technically not yet stopped owning, and stood on the porch in April sunlight looking like someone who had spent 3 months doing something difficult and necessary and was arriving at the other side of it. "Can we talk?" she said. I stepped back and let her in. Sophie ran to her immediately, with the pure, unguarded joy of a 5-year-old greeting her mother. Caleb came more slowly, with the watchful care of an 8-year-old who had understood more than we'd intended and was still finding his position. Dana held both of them for a long moment in the hallway, and I stood back and watched and understood that whatever happened between Dana and me, we had built 2 people who were going to be fine. She stayed for an hour. We talked about the settlement terms. Claire and her attorney had been making progress, and about the school transition and about a parenting coordinator Patrick had recommended who worked specifically with high-functioning separated couples who needed structure more than intervention. Before she left, she stood at the front door for a moment and said, "I've been thinking about what you said, that you're both devastated and calculating, that you were both at the same time. Yes, I think I loved the calculating part because it meant you were never going to fall apart," she said. "And I think I hated it for the same reason." She paused. "I needed you to need me in a way that was visible. You needed me in ways that weren't." She stopped. "I don't know if that could have been fixed." "Neither do I said honestly. "I want to try counseling," she said. "Not for the marriage. For co-parenting. For making sure we do this part right." "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." She left. I closed the door. Sophie was back at the kitchen table with her horses. Caleb was on the couch with his book, watching me over the top of it with the particular attention of a child taking inventory. "Is Mom okay?" he asked. "Mom is going to be okay," I said. "We both are." He nodded, returned to his book. The specific trust of that nod, the willingness to take my word for it, to extend the faith that children extend to parents who have not yet given them reason to stop, landed in the place where I keep the things I don't put in folders. I went to the kitchen, made dinner. The house was full of the ordinary sounds of a Saturday evening. Caleb turning pages, Sophie narrating her drawings to herself, the dogs scratching at the back door to come in. The settlement was finalized in June. Negotiated, not contested, Claire and Dana's attorney worked through 4 sessions over 6 weeks and arrived at an arrangement that both of us could live with, which is the correct standard for a negotiated settlement and a significantly higher bar than it sounds. Joint legal custody, primary physical with me during the school week and with Dana on alternating weeks. A transition schedule that Patrick's parenting coordinator helped us design around Caleb's baseball and Sophie's drawing classes, and the specific rhythms of 2 children who needed consistency more than they needed anything else. The house sold in August. Dana found an apartment in Dilworth, 12 minutes away, close enough that the kids could move between us without the commute becoming its own hardship. I rented a house in the same neighborhood, 2 blocks from the school, with a backyard that Caleb immediately assessed for baseball utility and Sophie immediately assessed for horse drawing ambience. They found things to like about both houses. Children are more resilient and more perceptive than adults usually give them credit for. They grieve, they adjust, they locate the good in the new arrangement with an adaptability that is both inspiring and slightly humbling. Caleb asked me, the first weekend in the new house, whether I had been sad when the plan to separate was made. Yes, I said. Very. Did you cry? I thought about the parking garage. 40 minutes. 3 days before I could say it to Patrick. In my own way, I said. He considered this. What's your way? I get very quiet and I think about things for a long time. That sounds lonely, he said. I looked at my 8-year-old son. It was, I said. Yes. He nodded with the gravity of someone receiving information and filing it carefully. You can tell me, he said, when you're sad. I won't break. I thought about Dana saying I needed you to need me in a way that was visible. I thought about 8 years of a marriage in which my interior life had been, as Patrick once said, a well-secured facility with limited visiting hours. Okay, I said. I'll remember that. The co-parenting counseling began in September. A woman named Dr. Reyes, who worked out of an office on Providence Road and who was, I discovered in the first session, entirely unimpressed by the fact that I was an attorney and Dana was a skilled strategist, and who had a particular gift for making both of us feel like people rather than positions. Dana and I found a working rhythm. Not a warm one. Not the warmth of a friendship that has survived a transition, which I have seen in other separated couples and which was not, I think, available to us. A functional one. A respectful one. The rhythm of two people who share the most important project of their lives and have learned, late, to communicate honestly about it. She showed up at the new house one Saturday in October to pick up the kids, and I was in the backyard with Caleb working on his pitching form. He had been working on a curveball for 3 weeks with a focus that was either genuine athletic interest or an inherited tendency towards systematic improvement, probably both. Dana stood at the back door watching for a moment before Caleb noticed her. Mom, he waved. Watch this. He threw the pitch. It broke late and low. Not where he'd aimed, but closer than last week. Nice, Dana said. She looked at me. He's been working on that? Every day after school for 3 weeks. She smiled, a real one, unguarded. Of course he has. We stood in the backyard in the October light, two people who had built something together and were now managing its careful restructuring. Watching our son throw a baseball at a strike zone he was going to hit consistently by spring if his current trajectory held. He's going to be okay, Dana said quietly. They both are, I said. We did something right. We did several things right, I said. We were just better at the parenting than the marriage. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think we could have fixed it? If we'd talked earlier? I had asked myself this question in various forms for 10 months. I had a lawyer's answer and a human answer, and they were not the same answer. I think we could have had an honest conversation about what wasn't working, I said. Whether that conversation would have saved the marriage, I genuinely don't know. We are both people who protect ourselves through preparation instead of vulnerability. That's a hard thing to change even when you want to. I'm working on it, she said. In therapy. So am I said. Apparently Caleb identified the problem 6 months ago. She looked at me. He told me my way of being sad sounds lonely, I said. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite grief. Something between them that belonged specifically to the particular complexity of what we were to each other now. He's 8, she said. He's not wrong, I said. She picked up Sophie, who had appeared at the back door with a drawing of a horse she needed her mother to evaluate immediately. Dana held the drawing at arm's length with the gravity the assignment demanded and gave a detailed assessment. Sophie listened with the serene confidence of someone who has never questioned whether she will be received. I watched them and thought about the folder still in my home office desk. The documentation, the financial analysis, the 18 months of school pickups and pediatric appointments and teacher conferences that I had logged with the thoroughness of someone who understood that memory is not evidence. I had built that folder because I was afraid. Not of Dana, not of losing the case. Afraid of losing them. Of walking into a proceeding I hadn't prepared for and coming out the other side with 2 weekends a month and a version of my children's lives that I watched from a scheduled distance. The fear had been real. The preparation had been, in its cold way, an act of love, the only form of love I knew how to perform in a crisis, which was to prepare for the worst while hoping for something better. What I have now is not what I planned for. But it is something I can build on. a backyard in Myers Park, a son who throws curveballs, a daughter who draws horses on every available surface and brings them to breakfast with the serene confidence of someone who has never questioned whether she will be received. 2 houses, 12 minutes apart. A custody schedule that we follow and occasionally adapt. A co-parenting relationship that is functional and respectful and has, over the past 6 months, developed the very early outline of something that might eventually be called a genuine co-parenting friendship, if both of us keep doing the work. Dana texted me in November. A photo of Sophie's latest drawing, a horse, but this time with a rider who bore a passing resemblance to Sophie herself, small and determined in the saddle. She says it's her, Dana wrote. She says she's going somewhere. I looked at the drawing for a long time. A 5-year-old on a horse going somewhere, drawn on a piece of paper that had been texted from one parent to the other across 12 minutes of Charlotte suburb. She is, I wrote back. Dana sent a single thumbs up. Then, after a pause, so are we. I set my phone down and went to make dinner. The house smelled like pasta and dog, and the specific lived-in warmth of a place where children have recently been present. Copernicus, no, that was someone else's dog. Our dog was a retriever mix named Franklin who was theoretically Caleb's responsibility and practically mine, which was a pattern I was beginning to suspect was hereditary. I made the pasta. I set 2 places for tomorrow when the kids came back. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of a Wednesday evening and thought about 10 years of marriage, and the folder on my desk, and the parking garage, and Caleb telling me my way of being sad sounds lonely. He was not wrong. It had been lonely, the preparation, the documentation, the careful strategic architecture built around an absence of vulnerability. It had been the only tool I had. It had done what tools do. It had held the structure together long enough to get everyone to safety. Now the structure was different. Smaller, lighter, built to different specifications. Not the house I thought I was building in year 1, but built on real measurements, honest assessments, the actual weight of the actual load. I am a litigator. I know the difference between a case that is won and a life that is good. They are not always the same thing. This time I think they might be. Dana Hargrove did not begin planning to leave her marriage because she stopped loving her husband. She began planning because she had learned, over 10 years, that the man she married processed vulnerability as a liability and intimacy as a risk, and she had run the calculation on what it would cost her to remain financially and emotionally dependent on someone whose interior life was inaccessible to her. The planning was not the cause of the marriage's failure. It was the symptom, the inevitable endpoint of a woman who needed security building her own version of it because she had concluded the marriage could not provide it. This is the story's central irony. 2 people with identical survival mechanisms destroyed the thing both of them were trying to protect. Joel documented because he was afraid of losing his children. Dana planned because she was afraid of being left without recourse. Both of them were operating from fear. Neither of them said so. The marriage ended not in a confrontation of opposites but in a collision of mirrors. What the story ultimately reveals is the cost of competence without vulnerability. Joel and Dana were functional, effective, strategically capable people who built a functional, effective, strategically capable household and called it a marriage. What they could not build, what neither of them knew how to build, was the specific infrastructure of emotional access that allows 2 people to tell each other when something is breaking before it breaks. Dana tried, in the oblique language of her available emotional vocabulary. Joel heard and did not move because moving would have required him to acknowledge being afraid, and acknowledgement was not in his professional skill set. The parallel investigation is the story's most morally complex element. Joel's documentation was legally defensible and strategically correct. It was also, as Claire Ashworth noted, a litigator's response to a human situation, the instinct to build a case rather than have a conversation, to prepare for the worst rather than risk the vulnerability of addressing it directly. He was not wrong to protect himself. He was not wrong to protect his children. But the folder on the desk was also a monument to the exact quality that had made the marriage unsalvageable: the preference for preparation over presence. Caleb's observation, that his father's way of being sad sounded lonely, is the story's most devastating line precisely because it came from an 8-year-old who had not been trained to soften it. Children see the actual shape of things. Joel had been lonely inside his own marriage, inside his own grief, inside his own protection of the people he loved. The child named it in one sentence that no legal brief could have improved on. The image that stays with me is the folder. 18 months of school pickups and pediatric appointments, logged and documented. The evidence of a father who loved his children in the only language he was fluent in when everything else was failing. There is something both admirable and heartbreaking about it. The man who could not say I'm afraid of losing them but could produce, on demand, a documented record of every moment he had been there. We talk about emotional unavailability as though it is simply an absence, a failure to show up. But Joel showed up. He showed up to everything. He just showed up armored, prepared, 3 steps ahead, with the exits located and the contingencies planned. The showing up was real. The armor was also real. And Dana, standing in the kitchen with 4 rehearsed words and a glass of wine she couldn't touch, was trying to tell him that she had needed the man inside the armor and had stopped believing she could reach him. Maybe she could have. Maybe, with the honest conversation 3 years earlier, something different was possible. Or maybe 2 people who both reach for strategy when they're scared will always eventually find themselves across a kitchen island with competing folders, having prepared for everything except the simple human question. Are you okay? And can you tell me? Costs something, that question. Less than the alternative. Almost always less than the alternative.